Good morning. I'm Renetta Burkhalter, Coordinator of Academic Support Services at TCC Southeast, and a graduate of the Clara cohort of 2017-18. Yes, Carla, you did that too. Dr. Pedro Portillo serves as Coordinator of Admissions and Registrar at Tarrant County College and has over 15 years of experience in higher education. As a first-generation college student, he understands firsthand the challenges of being a college student and has a passion for helping new students find their way. He has presented his research on first-generation underrepresented students at both state and national conferences. Please help me welcome Dr. Portillo to the stage.
Let me just get set up here. That's me and my son. We went to Hawaii this, when did we go? Back in October. So we were, what was that we used to do? Zip line. We were zip lining where they filmed the Jurassic Park. You can ask me about that later. Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to the Spring Leadership Conference. I wanted to begin by sharing that for those of you that are in Clara as well, I'm also a previous Clara member, and I'm part of the class of 2012. And it was right after completing Clara that I got accepted into the doctoral program at the University of North Texas. And on October 10th of this past year, so about 3 months ago, is when I successfully defended my dissertation. So, So for me, October 10th will be one of those days that I'll never forget. It's kind of like a birthday or a wedding anniversary. And for me, it was like when I got my independence and I got my life back. Because it's really good to be on the other side of dissertation. Let me tell you, it's really good. So as you can see from my title here, I did a study on first-generation students. And what began as research was really grounded in research because I felt that I was interviewing my 18-year-old self when I was conducting this study. So while this study took about 3 years from beginning to end, it really has been a 40-year journey, and I'm glad to be able to share that with you today. So here's a roadmap on how today's presentation is going to run. I'm going to provide some context on my background, so kind of give you an idea of why this research was important to me. I'm then going to go into the findings that came out of the research, and then I'm going to provide some recommendations for you as practitioners, which is everybody in this room. So I need everybody to take your cell phone out, right? So we can use cell phones here. We are going to have some interaction here, but you don't need to move around or talk to the people at your table if you're not into that. So take your cell phone out, and I need you to send a text message to 37607. And the message that you're going to send is my wife's name, Sofia Garcia. I'm using her Poll Everywhere account. For those of you that are familiar with Poll Everywhere, I'll give you a minute to get that set up. So again, you're going to send a text message to 37607 and then one word, Sofia Garcia. Okay, and so what I want to know is, I mentioned that I'm going to give recommendations to practitioners, so I want to know what kind of practitioners we have in the audience today. So you should have an option there, and then, so now you're going to select either if you're, an administrator, hit A and hit send. A lot more administrators. It's good to see that there's a lot of faculty in here today. I like it when I do see faculty at these events. So some of the recommendations I will make really affect all of us, because anybody that comes in contact with first-generation students really can take these recommendations to heart. So thank you for participating in that one. And there'll be other polls throughout the study as well. So again, some background about me. Here's a map of the United States and Mexico. And I've put two little dots up there. I don't know if you can see them. But that first little dot is where my mother is from. She is from a border town in Mexico. So on Mexico side, it is Acuña Piedras Negras area, which is on the United States side is Del Rio, Texas. Some of you may be familiar with that. And then my father is from further inland Mexico. He's from the Ranchos de Santiago in Chihuahua, Mexico. And my parents grew up in a time when it was important for them to contribute to the family. So my mom says that after she had completed the 8th grade, my grandfather pulled her out of school so that she could help take care of not only the family, the household chores, but also my younger uncles and aunts. My father says that as a man, once you were able to pick up a shovel, then you were pulled out of school to go work the farmlands. So for him, that happened in the 3rd grade. And that's where the 8th and the 3rd come up there next to my mom and dad. So myself and my siblings, we were born here in Fort Worth. So that makes me both a first-generation American and a first-generation college student. Additionally, I grew up in a predominantly Hispanic community. And Latino communities are known for strong family bonds, these strong family connections. What I refer to in my research is as familismo. And we stuck pretty close to home, a strong family unit. But we did everything together. We would go to the grocery store together. We would take mi abuela to the doctor, mainly so that I could help them interpret. But again, we didn't venture far from home. So there's this story that I share, and my wife would, if she was here, she'd tell you that it's true. I remember back when I was in middle school, and my dad took us out to this fancy restaurant. I think you know it as Chili's restaurant. And I remember so vividly the booth that we sat at, because it was a big deal. We didn't venture far from home. We typically stuck to our neighborhood, and we would go to the restaurants that mimicked our surroundings. But we went to Chili's restaurant when I was in middle school, and I remember the corner that we sat at. It was a corner booth, and what I ordered, it was a chili dog and lemonade, right? Because I was really big into chili dogs back then. And I would tell you, it was such a big deal that was probably the best lemonade I'd ever had. Okay, so keeping on this idea of communities and switching gears, I mentioned in my research that the Supreme Court case of Brown versus the Board of Education put an end to legal segregation. But let's keep it real. Some schools are still very highly segregated. A simple Google search of the high school that I attended, which is just down the street from here, pulled up this data here. And this is from the 2019 U.S. News Report. And that bottom chart is the Hispanic student population at this high school, which makes up 93% of the students at this high school. And overall, it is 98% minority at the school. So when I was in school, I did better in 3 sports, football, basketball, and track. I was also a scholar athlete, which means that of the athletes, I also met some other academic qualifications that gave me this award. I also graduated top 10% of my class, and there's a story behind that as well, and if I have time, I'll share that with you. I was in honors courses, and I was also in student council. So what I'm sharing with you here is that I was very involved in my high school, right? And so in reflection, I think that I got so involved when I was in high school because I felt a sense of community there and family. I felt comfortable there. I was surrounded by people that looked like me, that talked like me. So I really got involved there. So now let's transition over to once it was time to go to undergrad. I enrolled at Texas Christian University. So some of you might know what's coming, but remember the student demographic here, right? So I couldn't go back 20 years to when I attended TCU, but this is a current graph here, and I pulled this from their own website. I just put in TCU student demographic, and what you see here is the purple line is what makes up the Caucasian or white students, and then the minority students are up above there. So when I attended there, it was almost the complete opposite of what I had been used to. My life was turned upside down. The white students made up about 70% of the population there. I remember I would walk across campus and count on my fingers, how many Latino faces I would see. Sometimes I wouldn't even make it to the second hand, There just wasn't many people that looked like me, faculty, staff, or students. Also, to save money, I was a commuter student. So in reflection, I think that was one of the contributing factors on why I didn't get involved there. So, I suffered culture shock. I didn't get involved, and I felt alone. That first year, I felt very alone. And even past that, I just had trouble, trying to belong there. But eventually, I did find comfort because as I was walking through the halls one day, I saw a flyer for a Latino student organization on campus, and I attended their meeting, and that then became my support group. But let's fast forward a little bit. So over the course of the next 12 or so years, which include work and going to school, I had earned my bachelor's degree, I had graduated with my master's, I completed Clara, and then I was accepted into the doctoral program at the University of North Texas. Now, during my studies at the University of North Texas, I often gravitated towards the literature as it pertained to first-generation Latino students. And it was only natural. I was, part of both groups. But as you can see, by reading these, what I found was there was a strong focus on the deficiencies of this group, often listing barriers such as being academically underprepared, attending under-resourced schools, being low income, and having inadequate financial support. I felt this group of students was being treated as second-class students. I took it personally because they were talking about me. I asked my son, I read some of these, and I'm like, Mijo, what is academically underprepared? What does that sound like to you? It sounds like a job, So again, I took that personally. I'm like, that doesn't describe me. I didn't feel that way. I lived this, and I didn't feel that way. I just mentioned I was top 10% of my class. I was, honor roll student. I struggled when I got to school, but it wasn't for being academically underprepared. So prior to my dissertation, I had done a study within the program where I had interviewed other Latino undergrad students, and they shared with me their high school experiences. And they were telling me as well, oh yeah, we were in honors courses, we took AP tests, we were heavily involved. So again, but they also had this difficulty in the transition to university. So what was it? It made me think, what's happening here? Academically they're there, they're competent, but there is this struggle with transition. Then I reflected on another topic that I had come across in my studies, and it was this idea of cultural capital. And then that's cultural capital. Okay, so it was this idea of cultural capital that I think was missing. So that academically they were competent to be there, they just didn't understand, how to navigate the environment. So reflecting on the existing deficit narrative and my own experiences, I felt that there was a gap in the literature. There are first-generation students that are successful. They're involved in honors programs, like I mentioned. They were presidents of organizations. Where are their stories? So I set out to find successful first-generation Latino students, and I wanted to hear from them in their own words how they overcame these, obstacles and became successful. How did they acquire their cultural capital? And I wanted to document their stories and put it into the narrative. So the gap in the literature, this concept of cultural capital, which I'll define in a minute, and my experiences all led to the birth of my dissertation topic. So this was my dissertation, The Missing Piece of the Puzzle, a study on how first-generation Latino male students acquire cultural capital. And that's why there's puzzle pieces on the side of the PowerPoint. So as we get into the study, I think this is a good time to start defining some of these terms that we've been throwing around. So cultural capital. So cultural capital really is accredited to Pierre Bourdieu. He's a French sociologist. And what he wanted to find was why students from certain socioeconomic classes were excelling at higher rates than students from lower socioeconomic classes. And what he came up with was this idea of cultural capital. He found that students from the middle and upper class possessed these characteristics that were valued in higher education. So you think that in his studies, those students that were middle and upper class, they were reading literature, poetry, they were attending theaters, they were going to plays. So when they would go to school, they looked the part, right? They sounded like the part. So as instructors or faculty, they were gravitating and giving these students the attention because like, oh, well, that one looks like a student. This other one that kind of talks weird and I don't really get his slang, I'm not going to give him that much attention. So that's what came out of his study, is that these students possess that capital, that cultural capital. So it says it's the degree in ease and familiarity that one has with the dominant culture of society. So we're taking this society as higher education. So what is the dominant culture in higher education? Now, familismo is the Mexican cultural values of loyalty, commitment, and dedication to the family. So it's this strong family unit, and that's what we talk about when we mention familismo. And then first generation and legacy students. So a first generation student is any student whose parents did not graduate from college. And then legacy student we're taking as a student who's not only their parents, but maybe even their grandparents and so on. So you have this like legacy of like, oh, everybody in our family's gone to college, which is weird to me to think, but that's what we're defining as legacy students. So now we have another poll. I want to know, what's your educational heritage? Are you a first generation student, meaning that your parents did not complete college? Are you a second generation student, meaning that your parents did go to college, and so you're the second generation? Or are you a legacy student that, oh, you have this like history of going to college? And I'll tell you, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and he mentioned one day that, oh, my grandma went to, I forget where he said, I don't know if he said A&M or UT, and I was like, well, that was just weird to me. I'm a first generation student, and it was just weird to me to think that like my grandma going to college, because like my mom doesn't even have an iPhone, doesn't know how to text, so even think that my grandmother would be, I don't know, it was just weird, like I mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of first generation students in here, and you kind of get where I'm coming from. I think sometimes maybe even so, like I say, it's hard for me to understand the legacy side of it. I think it might be hard for second generation, maybe even legacy students to understand that, hey, there's students out there that just don't get it. They don't understand this jargon that we use every day on a daily basis here. So I think it's good to kind of reflect on some of that as we keep going. Okay, so in my study, I did interview 12 participants, and this chart identifies them. I did give each student the option to choose their own name or their pseudonym. I also include here the age, their GPA, whenever we did the interviews, and then the major that they were looking to go into. And I was questioned on that because like there's a Charles up there and there's a Steve, and it's like, why didn't you give them all Hispanic names? Because but they got to choose their own name. Now the last column that you see there, the artifacts, I invited every student, to bring an artifact or an item that they felt reflected, what success in college meant to them. And so that's where those artifacts come in. But I'm going to share with you those on the next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, as a bonus to the interview process, I invited each participant to bring an artifact they felt represented success in college. And this served really two purposes. The first purpose was kind of to break the ice, to get the students talking. I think anybody in general really likes talking about something that's dear to their heart, and this was no exception. They just wouldn't stop talking about the items that they brought in. Additionally, the second thing is it also provided another glimpse into why they were in college and why this was important to them. So I'm excited to share some of these artifacts with you today. So this is what Jose brought in, and he referred to this as his Catholic rosary. He mentioned that he was struggling in college that first semester, and that his parents, on one of their trips to Mexico when they returned, they brought back this rosary for him. They said they had it blessed by a Catholic priest. So listening to him tell that story, the emotion that he put behind it, I could tell that him and his parents had this strong connection, and they understood each other, and they knew that maybe they couldn't help him on the academic side, but it's like, what can we do to provide him some support? So they brought in this rosary, and he would pray with it, and he said that it just turned around life for him. This one here is a backpack. This is what, who brought this one? Mario brought this one, his backpack. And he said that this backpack reminded him of the journey that his parents took in coming to America and bringing all of their belongings, everything that they could pack into the car, that's all they brought. And that's what this backpack reminds him of. And he also reflected that he felt very privileged that in his backpack he could carry a laptop and his book, where his parents brought all their belongings in the car. So again, it's this connection to the family. And this one was interesting. So what you see here is graduation stoles and then a car medallion. And right away we jump to that car medallion, right? But I let him talk about the graduation stoles, and he said that the graduation stoles were important because it represented to him and to his community that somebody that looked like him could graduate and excel in school. And then, he got into the car medallion. Like, yeah, I want to know about that. So he said that the car medallion is symbolic to him because his father owned a lowrider shop in the community. And he said one afternoon there was a young man that came into the store and was kind of cruising the merchandise, and his father asked him, he's like, what are you doing? He's like, shouldn't you be in school? And the boy responded, man, nobody cares. They don't even know that I'm missing. And so the father responded to him like any father would. He's like, well, I care. You need to get your butt back in school. And so later on, the boy would come back, time and time again to give his dad updates. And he finally did graduate from high school, and he came back and said that it was those words that, really kept him and put him back in school. So again, it's like taking all of these artifacts and finding out, like, what is the meaning behind all these? What's the common factor among all of these artifacts? And it all related back to family. Everything that they're doing and the success that they're thinking about all relates back to family. It's not an individual goal of coming to college. It's not, I'm doing this for me. I'm doing this for my family. That's what they're reflecting there. Okay, need some water. Okay, so these are the 5 themes that emerged from my analysis. And if anything, for like movie watchers, think of this as like a character arc, right? So the first 2 themes are when they first started school, those first 2 semesters, and that's when they're like, I'm kind of nervous, I don't know what I'm doing here. That third one, that alternate legacy, that was really like the turning point of their character, right? Their character arc. When they started really getting it, like, okay, now I'm starting to get motivated, I'm starting to feel a little bit more familiar here. And then the last 2, the engaging activities and validating experiences, those are really once they brought it all together and they really were starting to get that cultural capital, really starting to get familiar with the college campus. So the theme of unfamiliarity emerged as the first theme among their progression as college students. Taken as a whole, the sub-themes represent the challenges that first-generation students encountered by not having the cultural capital that legacy students possess. Their parents didn't pass on the information on how to go to college, how to attend college, how to study. And for some as first-generation students, it was a big step for them. For some, it was like the first time they'd ever been on a college campus. So as first-generation students, let me go over the first impression. Their first impressions echoed feelings of being in awe of the size of the campus as they repeated words such as, it's scary, I felt lost, and it was intimidating. One student recounted that his first day of school, during registration, he stood in the wrong line for 30 minutes, and he was just too embarrassed to get out of that line. So it's Greek to me. It's Greek to me, it's a common saying, it just means that something's foreign to you, right? You don't understand. And that came out because time and again, when I was listening to them, they were talking about they didn't understand the jargon. Again, I mentioned earlier that we use here on the college campus. And then they felt embarrassed to ask for help. They didn't want to ask for help because they just felt, I should know this stuff. College students should know these terms that people are using, so I'm not going to ask for help. It could be argued that one of the most important things for a student in college is the degree audit. And oh my gosh, when I would asking these students about the degree audit, their first semesters, they were like, what is that? How do you read that? And again, how important is a degree audit? It's your roadmap on how to get out of school with a degree, so you're not just taking classes here and there. Their answer is like, well, I'm here for my basics. Well, what are your basics? I don't know, but basics is a term that all students use. That degree audit was important. The high school approach to things. So that emerged when I was talking to students, and you'll find this funny. A student mentioned that his first semester, once he got it scheduled, he said, oh, well, I'm taking English in the morning, Monday and Wednesday. I'm taking history, blah, blah, blah. He's like, I got so much free time. Because when you don't know, you benchmark against what you do know. So they were benchmarking it against high school. And in high school, you're in school all day. So when they look at their schedule, like, I'm only going to school like in the morning. And I said, no, And later he realized that, oh, I'm supposed to study outside of the classroom? They also mentioned their study habits. Their study habits just weren't cutting it coming from high school to college. They could get away in high school with studying the night before a test and cramming. And they soon realized they had that rude awakening that, yeah, that's not gonna cut it here. Another thing that was shocking to them in this new environment was the independence that students have here on campus. One student reflected that, oh, like students, regarding attendance, he's like, students come or they don't, it's up to them. He's like, nobody's taking roll and nobody's cares, is what they were saying. And then the second part of that was the independence from the instructor. He's like, he says that in high school, if you didn't turn in an assignment, the instructor was like on your back. He's like, where's your homework? You need to turn in your homework. And here, if you don't turn in your homework, then you don't turn it in. So they weren't ready for that independence either. And then navigating two worlds. They came from this, I showed you my high school demographic, I was the dominant, ethnic group there. And then going to this environment where now they're in the minority, they just weren't ready for that. They just didn't mesh well with this new culture here. So Mario's comments here, I want to share with you a quote from Mario that highlighted both navigating two worlds and the code switching. So it says, in my school environment, I value education, friends, and social experiences. In my home environment, I value the conversations with my parents, helping out in the house, and cultural traditions. Now, navigating these two worlds has been hard because neither world knows of each other and what it means to be in it. So I have to remember to explain to my friends in college what it means to be a low-income, first-generation college student, and to my parents at home what it means to be in college. So Mario's comments highlight the challenges with unfamiliarity that he faced daily while interacting with peers and his parents. And underutilizing resources. Now, either the students were naive or it was the pride, but they're like, oh, I don't need the help. I don't need tutoring. And then another student said that tutoring or help as a handout. He's like, when you're used to coming from where he was from, whenever anybody wanted to help you, he felt it as pity, and he's like, I don't want that. So it's either pride or being naive, so they needed to get over that, and later they did, but initially that's the way they felt. They also underutilized resources just because being unfamiliar with the environment. One student mentioned that he was in a, I think it's called like a math emporium type classroom where it's like you have the classroom, but you also have a tutoring lab kind of meshed in. And he said that by the end of this, I think he'd gone through halfway into the semester before he realized that there was tutors in the room. He's like, I didn't know that people were even in here to help us. Again, it's just being unfamiliar. It's like, I've never been in an environment like this, but then he finally realized it. Okay, we have another poll. So this poll, I'm asking you, so now before you start answering, reflect back when you were an undergrad student, right? So maybe, right out of high school. And who did you go to for that educational advice? Like, who did you turn to when you were selecting what college you were going to go to, what major you were going to go into? And just type that word up there. So a few years ago, we went to a conference at Texas A&M University. It was the Student Conference on Latino Affairs, or SCOLA, as some of you may know it. And there was a gentleman that put up a slide that had to do with information sources. And he had two columns there. One was, and I think it was broken by ethnicity. So on one side it was your Anglo white students, and on the other side it was the Hispanic students. And the same question was posed, who did you go to for advice? And so on the Anglo student side, they listed their parents and yada, yada, yada. And over on the Latino students, parents was like number 10 or number 12 on that list. They just weren't turning to their parents for the advice, And I'm seeing that here, that, some of you are putting parents, some of you are putting friends and myself, but for these students that were in the study, a lot of these decisions they were making on their own. Thank you. So the second theme, the theme of identity reconstruction, and again, this is still within that for the character arc of they were still kind of getting to know the college, captures the early semesters at Texas College. And I felt this captured a time when my participants felt a need to create a new identity or persona, one as a college student. So they grew up in communities that centered on family bonds where they could turn to their parents and they leaned on them for advice. But for some reason, coming out of their interviews, I saw that their parents weren't taking a guiding role in their lives anymore as soon as they graduated from high school. But this limited parental involvement may have been due to circumstances. You can see from Frank's comment here. He says, I don't think they intentionally did it. Again, we're talking about why they weren't involved. He's like, I think they were learning as they went along too. They couldn't advise me much. He's like, my dad went to the 4th grade and my mom finished high school in Mexico. So, I mean, they couldn't help me that much anyways. So Frank indicates that not only did he struggle with his new identity, but so did his parents as parents of a college student. Now, where are my friends? That theme, what came from that is that when I was talking to the students, they mentioned that, again, similar to my own story, when they were in high school, they were very active. They were in sports, they were in clubs, and so again, they felt like family. They felt a sense of belonging when they were in their high schools. And they mentioned when they came into the classroom, they were, looking around like, I'm by myself here. There's nobody here for me to talk to. One student, kind of broke down like, I didn't have anybody to share this experience with of what it is to be a first-generation student in the classroom because he was struggling and he wanted to share it with somebody, but he didn't have anybody. So that's where Are My Friends comes from. The Lone Ranger, that one comes because, again, students mentioned that a lot of the stuff they were doing on their own, they were figuring it out on their own. A lot of them mentioned that by trial and error, that's how they learned. I asked them, well, how did you learn how to navigate the school? Oh, by trial and error. He's like, it was time to turn in an assignment. I turned it into this box, got a 0. Oh, I shouldn't turn it into that box. I should turn it into this one over here. Again, he didn't ask anybody, just by trial and error, just figuring stuff out on your own. He also mentioned that, he didn't feel that, and it was his own internal, not to say that the school didn't, but he felt that nobody was out there telling them, hey, come over here, we'll help you. Internally, he internalized that. So it was his reality. Now, reflecting on the participants' voices, they never indicated that anybody was rude or made them feel unwelcomed here. But at the same time, this new environment, it just didn't feel like home. The lack of friends in the strange environment made them feel like they didn't belong. Steve shared, growing up, I never gave any thought to college. My mom and dad, they never went to college, so college really wasn't talked about. I just figured college was for rich kids. Now, his comments were echoed among many of my participants. They just didn't talk about college at home. And the imposter syndrome is, many of you have heard about that, right? The imposter syndrome is when you feel that you don't have the merits to belong there, even though you might have earned it. So a student mentioned that when they were having their club fest, club crawl, whatever you call it at your institution, when all the organizations are out, he was walking through the halls and he saw, some of the honors clubs, PTK and things like that. He walked right past those. He went right over to the Latino student organization. And he told me, he's like, well, I didn't identify as an honor student, but I identified as a Hispanic student, so that's the club for me. Now, later on, it ended up that he got into PTK and he became the president, but again, reflecting initially that he was, when he was early on in his development, he didn't identify that way. So he felt like an imposter, like, no, that's not me. There was another student that I had that went to a, what was it called? It was the Public Policy and Leadership Conference at Harvard University. And he got accepted to go to this conference based on an essay that he wrote. So by all merits, he was welcome there. But when he came back, he was like, I was the only community college student there, with students from Princeton, from Yale, what have you. And he was like, I just felt like I didn't belong. And again, it's this imposter syndrome, taking over. And it's like, no, dude, you belong there. You got there on your own merits. So again, they suffered from this. So identity reconstruction highlighted how participants struggled with their new identity as college students, mostly because it was unfamiliar and they didn't have anyone to share this experience with. Okay, so I've shared with you the early struggles my participants faced in their progression as college students, and I feel that altering legacy was the turning point for them. They had now completed a semester or two and were beginning to settle in as college students. So with parental sacrifice, I asked the students, hey, tell me a little bit about how you got here to Texas. And they reflected that, like I mentioned earlier, the student with the backpack, he's like, my parents packed up everything to, in search of a better opportunity. And some students came from Mexico, others came from, I think 2 or 3 of them came from California. And they reflected on this experience of my parents, left everything behind. They left their home behind because they couldn't bring everybody with them. Just whoever fit in the car was coming with us, right? So they left, for all cases, their family behind. So then they reflect on that, saying, they made that sacrifice to come here. I need to continue with that legacy, right? With that history, with what they're trying to, with the goal that they were trying to pursue. A commitment to family. That came out as I would ask students, why they were here, or what they were going to do now that they were here. A lot of them said, well, I struggled a lot when I was here because I didn't understand the environment. And I don't want that to happen to my community. So I'm going to go back to my community and I'm going to tell them, hey, when you go to college, this is what you need to know. This is what a degree audit is, right? This is how you study. They also mentioned being role models. They're like, my brother and sister need role models, and I want to be that for them. So again, it's this commitment to the family that pushes them forward and gives that turning point of like, okay. And then writing history. So Noah shared this reason for coming to college. He says, it really means a lot because when you're the first generation college student, you're basically making history. A college degree is forever. Your kids and grandkids will pass on stories on how you were the first. It's all history. So he knew the importance of this, and to him it's like, man, I'm going to create history because after me, he wanted to make the college degree the expectation and no longer the exception. So pushing forward, the last theme that's on there came from one student's experience that he told me that he was walking around campus and he was talking to another student that had already been there a while that he identified with. And the student told him, you know what, I think I'm going to try to transfer to Harvard next semester. And he kind of joked, like, why would you do that? He's like, well, because I can. And, so then the student reflected and I was like, yeah, you can. Why, who's holding you back from registering for that, for trying to go into Harvard? And then so the student, this is the student that later became PTK president. He said that he went to a PTK meeting, and while he was at the meeting, another individual told him, you know what, you should run for one of the board positions. He's like, why? He's like, well, because you can. And again, so then he heard it again. So it's like, it keeps staying in his mind that, why can't I do this? Why not me? And so that helped him push forward that, yeah, I'm going to continue on this journey. And then another student with this whole pushing forward said that he was, he said he was kind of stressing out about college and about his homework and stuff. So he was telling his mom about this. And she was like, Mimo, you should be grateful that you're stressing out about school because there's other people that are stressing out about like, real life issues. And so that made him reflect, you know what, you're right. So, it's always good to reflect on that wow, there is other people that don't have it as well as I do. And so that helped him, again, push forward and keep going as well. So reflect on the sacrifices of their parents and having an understanding of the great opportunity that a college degree can help them write their history. They wanted to continue to push forward. Okay, so engage in activities. So now we're, on that last part of the character arc. Now they're successful, so we're getting to the feel-good part of this now. So engage in activities makes up the final two themes that highlight the time when my participants began to engage with the college community. Engage in activities created the channel through which my participants were able to begin acquiring their cultural capital. Let me share Frank's comments on what's in the names of theme. So he says, one of my mentors, Dr. Flores, I took him for History 1302, and I didn't meet him through the mentoring program. I met him as a student. It was my first semester that I took him. When I was picking up my classes, I said, oh, look, a Mexican guy. Let me take him. He said, I saw a Hispanic name. Let me take him and see how he goes. Now, this was a constant among the interviews. Yes, they began to get involved, but whenever possible, they looked for familiarity, something that made them feel comfortable, something that made them feel like they were at home. And the best way of doing that was, identifying with the name. So intentional programming. 9 of my participants were involved in the Fuente Project, which is a minority male mentoring program. And they indicated that they joined these organizations because the name called out to them, right? Something about that, like, yeah, that's me. So I'm gonna go and get into that program. Now, these programs were designed, again, it's intentional, was designed to provide a sense of community to these students. It was designed to teach them leadership, to learn the soft skills, And it was wanted to create that pipeline from high school to community college, but also to continue that pipeline on to either career or to university. They discussed issues such as Latino masculinity, how to be a leader, and some of them also referred like, we don't ever talk about this stuff, and so that was one good thing about these intentional programmings. And another benefit that came out of being in these programs is that they made lifelong friends. This is what Jose shared about his friendships that he made within these groups. So in the Latino Student Organization, we always hype each other up. We say we're nervous about this situation, and we're like, you can do it, believe in yourself. We're always giving each other compliments and support. So by engaging in these targeted programs, my participants began to find community that served as their new support system. They were feeling more comfortable on campus and gaining a sense of belonging. Through Familismo, they were building their cultural capital. Okay, so lastly, I felt that validating experiences captured the instances when my participants felt like college material. They had gained enough cultural capital to feel like they belonged in college and understood how to successfully navigate it. Now, if you haven't heard of validating experiences, you need to look up Laura Rendon. She was a member of Clara, I believe, a few years ago as well, and she's written many articles on validating experiences, so that's just kind of a plug for Laura Rendon. And my research supports her findings as well. So let's get into these validating experiences. So sometimes encouraging words can be very powerful. In Javier's case, it was an email. So he received an email that said, I finished my semester. I got an email from one organization. It's called PTK. I didn't know what it was, but I went to that meeting. I found out it was for students that are doing good and have higher than a 3.5 GPA. I've never been put in that type of group before. For me, that was special. And it made me feel really good, like I was achieving something important. My perspective started to change, and I felt better about being here. Now, some people might shrug off this email and say, oh, okay, cool, I got this email. But I bet he printed this email and has it framed in his room. It was that important to him. Opportunity. So opportunity arose by, I think it's Woody Allen that kind of has that, I don't know if it's attributed to him that success is 80% attendance or something, or showing up, right? Something like that, something to that effect. So these students, I got some nods in the back. So some students said that just by attending these organizations, he said he went to PTK, and at that meeting, when they were going around sharing, well, what are you doing here? He said, well, I'm thinking of going into law school. One of the advisors and then a faculty member in the room had been wanting to start a law club on campus. And she heard him say he wanted to be a lawyer, so she's like, hey, let's start a law club on campus. So there you go. He attended this PTK meeting, and he had this opportunity to now create the law club, and I believe this was at another campus. Another student, the one that I mentioned earlier, said that when he went to the PTK meeting, just by being there and talking, that's when other members told him, you should run for president, and then that's when he became the PTK president. And again, just by attending. Another student mentioned that because he had this relationship with his mentor, whenever there was opportunities for public speaking engagements, she would always nominate him and tell him, oh, you would be a good candidate for this. People want to hear about the first generation student experience. And so this was a validating experience for him because he felt, wow, people want to hear my story. I'm important. And then growing their network. Within these groups, there was one student that was president of a Latino student organization on campus, and he said that they had these bi-weekly sit-downs with the campus president. And so he was like, oh yeah, I had these casual conversations with the campus president. I think, man, when I was 18, I didn't talk to any administrators. I don't know about you guys. And even within like the mentoring programs, sometimes we would invite, or they would invite individuals from the campus that were the vice presidents, they were directors. But within this mentoring program, they were just on a first name basis. And the students wouldn't find out until later that, wow, I was talking to the director of blah, 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 or I was talking to the vice chancellor of blah, blah, blah. So they were making these connections and again growing their network that later on when they were applying for jobs, hey, can you help me out with the letter of recommendation? So it was great for them to be able to grow their network. And then we talk about exemplars. So exemplars are just in-group role models. So somebody within your group that you identify with that's a role model to you, those are what exemplars are. And so Charles shares this about his exemplar. He says, I had people that would boost my self-esteem, like they would make me reflect on where I used to be and where I am now. I know that even when I feel lonely, like there are people rooting for me, and that really pushed me forward. So having role models was crucial to these participants so they could relate to a professional that looked like them. For some participants, these exemplars even turned into mother and father figures, as many of them mentioned. And then learning the rules of the game. That's another definition of cultural capital, kind of. But the way that they learned the rules of the game and how to be successful students is that within these programs, they were kind of constantly being hammered into their head. You need to go take advantage of these resources. You need to go to the tutoring labs. You need to start asking questions, speak up in class. Again, early on, they're like, well, I don't want to ask because, I should know this stuff. And they were embarrassed to ask, but, it started getting ingrained into them that, no, you need to start asking questions. That's what, these resources are here for. Okay, so now that the studies and the theme was done, I had to identify the essence of what was happening here. So what was the big picture? What's the big picture of everything once I was, put all these themes down? And I began to think, what's intertwined among all of these things? And it was familismo, or strong family bonds. My participants were seeking familismo this whole time. They wanted to fit in like any other college student. They wanted to be a part of this community. So this essence I felt captured the social and cultural complexities experienced by my participants as they were trying to balance their home and work life. So again, the first two themes, unfamiliarity and identity reconstruction, detailed the struggles that faced my participants as they felt separation from familismo on campus. Again, remember I mentioned that they grow up in these communities where close-knit communities and they do everything as family, the parents are always there. And then when they come to college, it's almost like, sure, you graduated high school, now you're on your own. And they're just not ready for that. They're just not ready for it, especially if you're used to always being there with your family. And again, granted, they were still there when they would go home. They just wouldn't talk about college. Anything that had to do with college, no, that was taboo. We don't talk about it. So that's where, the separation of family or familismo, those were the first two themes. And then with altering legacy, that was that turning point. So the desire to belong came about in there. And it was familismo that allowed my participants to connect their experience to their parents. Sometimes they think, well, nobody understands what I'm going through as a first-generation student. I'm going off into this new environment. And then they reflected in the study and say, well, when my parents came from Mexico to here to the United States, it was a similar journey. They were coming to a new environment. So, you know what? There is some things that we can share that are the same. So being able to have them reflect on that was very crucial as well. And again, that was that turning point for them. And then my final two themes. The themes of engaging activities, of joining Latino student organizations, mentoring programs, and finding exemplars on campus helped them find they were seeking, they were looking for family all along. And these validating experiences provided the encouraging words of trusted individuals made the participants feel like they really belonged on the campus. Okay, so now the study's done, right? Now what? So kind of in a nutshell, what happened there? The students, really what they were looking for is they were looking to belong on the campus. They wanted to feel comfortable here. They didn't want to be the most popular. They just wanted to feel like any other college student. They wanted to feel like they belonged here. So these are some of the recommendations, and I made 10 of them in my dissertation, but I'm only going to share a few of them with you here. And so these are some of the recommendations that I make for you as practitioners. What can we do to help students? And this isn't just for Latino students, this is really first-generation students in general. So all first-generation students are going to suffer this. They're going to suffer this unfamiliar environment, like, I don't know what I'm doing here. The language that they speak here is just going over my head, and I'm embarrassed to ask. So how do we make them feel more comfortable? And that's really what we're getting at here. So the first recommendation is we need to identify strategies to engage the parents or first generation students. Give them a sense of comfort on the college campus. How do we invite the parents here? You can ask my mom, again, I'm a first generation student. You can ask my mom what my degrees were in, she couldn't tell you. She supports me in the ways that she can, and she brags to all my tias, oh yeah, Mijo has a doctorate and this and that. But yeah, he's a doctor. Oh, doctor. But you ask what my degrees are. Maybe she knows the schools I went to. Oh, one's in Denton. But again, so how do we get the parents here? We need to find opportunities to get the parents here. And when I was an advisor, I used to tell my students, if your parents want to come in, I'll talk to them as well. You know, because again, with the students, when they, again, the young ones, when they've grown up always having their parents there and then they're no longer there, it's, you know, it's hard to cope with that. So another recommendation was provide validating experiences for first generation Latino students. So what are validating experiences? You know, that was my last thing, encouraging words. You know, as a faculty member, when the student turns in an assignment and it's good, you know, write something on their paper. Wow, this was a really great paper. Or something, you know, send them an email. When you see them in the hallway, say something. I mean, but you gotta get to know the student. You can't just go around telling them, hey, good job, good job. You know, you really gotta build that relationship and be sincere about it, because they're gonna see right through you if you don't. So build that relationship first. But again, it's encouraging words. And for anybody that's a business major, I mean, that's management 101, right? It's pats on the back, which you probably shouldn't do anymore. But, you know, back then it was, you know, you give people a pat on the back, you give them a, hey, way to go, buddy. So again, just provide these validating experiences. And then be intentional with the decor around the college campus in order to be inclusive. So what I mean by this is, you know, students should feel welcome on campus, and they should feel like, oh, this is kind of familiar. Not only during Hispanic Heritage Month, you know, during Hispanic Heritage Month, we're playing Spanish music and we got all this other stuff around, and then as soon as it's over, get that out of here. You know, why? Why can't some of those things stay up? I mean, be inclusive of all ethnicities and races. You know, students should feel like, hey, I belong here. Not, oh my gosh, you know, this is a weird environment for me. And then we need to change the lens that we look at students through. So instead of looking at students through this deficit lens, all that stuff that I showed you earlier, low income, academically underprepared, you know, change the lens. You know, find out some positive qualities in them and, you know, focus on those. Additionally, we need to change the lens we look at ourselves through, right? It's this whole shift of if the student being college ready or the college being student ready. You know, so we need to change our own lens and say that we're going to be student ready. Okay, with that, I want to thank Dr. Hubbard for allowing me to share my findings with you today.
Dr. Portillo.
Okay, we have set aside quite a bit of time for questions because he's done great research. We know we have practitioners here in the room. We know that you're at the beginning of the semester, and so those beginnings are good times to implement new strategies and do those things that we know we need to do. So what questions do you have for him based on his work? Yes.
I'm starting my class for the semester. I have 12 students, a small class, and I'm interested in finding out something about their parents and how their parents have supported them. But I don't know how to ask without being intrusive or looking like this is something that they didn't expect and they don't know how to handle.
So, and what class is this?
It's intro to engineering. Maximum for the class is.
So what I would do is, I wouldn't just single them out, right? I would make it more like an assignment for the entire class. Maybe, hey, I want some feedback on all my students, and then have them fill something out. That way it's more inclusive of everybody in the room and not, oh, you students over here that I'm targeting you. I think that would be the best approach, probably.
I was thinking of having them upload their story, which would be confidential to me, as that I could look at.
Yeah, I mean, you could still make it confidential. I don't see any problem with that. I think it's good to know where the student's coming from, because then that'll help you. Students want to be identified. If you can start talking to students and you identify with them in any capacity, you find some common ground, they're going to like that. They're going to want to know, oh, this instructor knows my name, he knows who I am, he knows my background. I think they would really appreciate that. But again, I just wouldn't single them out to say, oh, only you 4 kids over here, I need to know where you're from. I would make that an assignment for everybody.
But specifically, if I wanted to find out something about their family and their relationship with their parents and whether their parents give them support, is there something that I could request which would not be off-putting?
I think once you build that relationship, it's easier to get into that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other question? Oh, okay.
So Dr. Portillo, my brother. One of us, since I'm a little more seasoned than you in this college game administration, first generation also at Apostle. My parents, like the kids here, no different. They really didn't help me much, and how to figure out. My only advantage, like you, was that I was still connected to athletics at college. And so, but my friends didn't look like me, even though I was in El Paso at UTEP. But one of the things that the gentleman you speak to, the kids, is one of the things that I think we're still going to struggle with, and you may have discussed that with him because you faced it, is there's not a whole lot of us in college in our positions that look like us. And that we do bond together. And that's going to be a continuum. What do you think, as they seek out each other, you think that's something they're going to realize that's going to be continuous for them? To be seeking out those that look like them?
So one thing that I tell students, even within the mentoring programs, is don't stick to your silos, right? So yes, you feel comfort coming to speak to me, but you need to speak to other people as well, because that's not, the real world isn't staying in my silos. That's why, I said, we stayed growing up, I lived in this community, we didn't venture far from the community. So that's why it was a big deal when we went out to Chili's, like I said, when I was in 3rd grade. But we tell students, have other mentors, talk to all faculty members, and be inclusive of everybody. So I think initially they will gravitate towards, and I think it's good for them to see role models, or what we call the exemplars, to be able to identify with, like a Dr. Munoz. That's one person that I identified with, was Dr. Munoz. Like, wow, he has a PhD, he's a doctor, I can do that as well. Going to my first conference, when I first started working here at Tarrant County College, I went to my first Hispanic conference, and that was like a room full of people like you here, except they looked like me and they had these professional roles. And that was one of the things that changed it for me, like, wow, I can do that. So I think students will still, gravitate towards that or see that, but I try to encourage students that don't stay in your silos, and it's good to talk to other people, because that's the real world. Yes.
So your focus was on Latino students. How much of your research is translatable to other cultural groups or other diversity groups, be it students of color or students of other diversity, gay, lesbian, trans, etc.?
I think really translates to everybody, even though it was, I think the first generation piece is what captures all of it. The Latino piece was because you had to narrow your focus. When any of you that are in doctoral programs, they're always narrow your focus. So that's how I narrowed it down. But I think overall, the first generation piece is that unfamiliarity with, any first generation student, if you're white, if you're black, if you identify with some of the other things that you mentioned, students just want to belong. Everybody just wants to feel like they belong, Feeling like you don't belong, that's marginalization. Nobody wants to be marginalized. They want to be a part of the community. So I think that part of it translates to everybody.
And having a story about your top 10%, and that's a big part of our community college. So I'd love to hear how that affected you.
Okay, so my story and how it affected me, it's my top 10% story. So I graduated high school in 1998. That was the year that the top 10% went into effect, that first year. So I was getting letters from UT Austin, which is where I wanted to go, from A&M, Texas Tech. Mr. Portillo, you've already been accepted, you just got to send in your application. Just fill out your name and send it in. Great. So I went to tell my mom, and she was like, no, that's too far. All the schools are the same. You're going to stay somewhere local, right? And that's why I applied to TCU. So that was my top 10% story. Is that, again, not having that cultural capital, my mom was like, all schools are the same. You're gonna stay somewhere local, somewhere that we can keep an eye on you and take care of you.
I just want to say I agree with you about the first generation piece. When I was in the classroom myself, and it wasn't just centered around African American. I had, all types of students, but just seeing me and seeing what I went through, I had students who go on to get master's degrees and, want to get PhDs. Some of them started and had families. But the thing that encouraged me the most to get my PhD was when I heard that only 3% of the population had them, and only 1% was African American. So that kind of drove me. And even though it may not have driven a lot of my students, a lot of my classmates came behind me because I came from a small town in Mississippi. And nobody encouraged us to get PhDs, and my father had a fourth grade education, and my mom got a GED, sorry, it's a GED. My mom got a GED, so I was the first, and all my siblings went to the military, so I'm the only one in our family to get a college degree and to get a terminal degree.
Yeah, I think like my students mentioned in my research that they felt that there was always this unwritten or unspoken or in their house that they were going to go to college, even though they didn't have the college conversation with their parents. They just felt, one thing was like, I just felt that I had to go, like it was expected. It's like, yeah, but where did that come from? Because your parents never told you about it, and then once you did get there, they weren't talking to you. So I don't know, there's just this something, and it could be just reflecting on the journey of, again, their parents came here in search of better opportunity, and it's like, well, if I'm going to continue that, the degree is the way to do it.
Yeah, so I just want to make a quick comment observation. So you were talking quite a bit about getting the family involved, and I think that's a real important piece. One thing that's interesting though is even students who are not first generation may even sometimes believe that they are, and I'll use myself as a case. So I didn't even know that my parents had college degrees, and this is simply because of the side of the state we grew up on. So we grew up in Deep South Texas, where at the time that they finished college, segregation was still kind of a thing, and discrimination was certainly a thing. So although my mom had a 2-year degree in interior design, nobody's going to hire the next gen lady to do interior design work. So she worked for a retail shop. My dad finished the military, and he still had to do other types of jobs, even after he finished his degree. And still, even that, I didn't know my parents even had degrees until I was much older. So I always identified as a first generation student, and they still weren't able to really help me navigate things, simply because they weren't afforded those opportunities to be successful after they finished college. So I think that perhaps we should look at that as well, but also certainly really take to heart your discernment about including the family in things, and trying to bring them here, because I've even come across students on our campus who are undocumented, and their parents work jobs as busboys and servers and that sort of thing. But the mom, like I remember one student in particular, his mom, she has a degree from Mexico, and she used to work for AT&T in a corporate job. And because her husband made her come here, she had to start all over, and she didn't have her documents. So many times these students unfortunately feel as though they come from something that like a super working class family, migrant family, and we kind of label it that way. But many times these families just don't even, as you mentioned, don't understand the school system here. They'll say no vale aquí, which means it's not worth anything here. Yes, it absolutely is. It doesn't matter what country it came from. So I think really including families and parents in that will certainly help with that.
Yeah, I think that there's this, again, it's the fear of not understanding the way college works or the importance of it. One student mentioned that he didn't talk to his parents or specifically his mom about school because he was returning back from school, so he was I think 30, and he decided, this isn't the career I want to be in. I want to be a lawyer, I think was his thing. So he quit his job, got financial aid, and started coming to school, and his mom was so mad at him. She's like, how are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to support yourself? And she just couldn't get the understanding of what that degree was going to do for him. And then with inviting the parents or connecting them, we talk about being a student-ready campus or student-ready institutions. So it's one thing to say, well, we're trying to invite the parents, but they're not coming. Well, then you got to go to where the parents are, right? Get out there into the community and find them. Go, like at the church that I attend. I always tell people I work at a university or at a college, so if you have any questions about the experience, come talk to me. At least you're comfortable here, because maybe they're not comfortable coming here to this institution again because it doesn't look like I belong here. So, for those practitioners out there, get out there into the community, somewhere where, meet them where they're at, right, where they feel comfort.
Thank you for your work and your research. I think it's worth noting that the research that you've done will open the door to what maybe some would not consider a minority, but as a farm kid in western Kansas that went to the other side of the state, to a school with 40,000 students, I stepped onto that campus and recognized I feel like a complete minority and I don't belong. And I think the research that you're doing will open the conversation up to understanding where everyone is sitting is a little bit different place. And and helping those students go from one step to the other step to the other. The thing that I saw really sort of fascinating about the 10 students that you worked closely with was the names that they chose, if they didn't choose their own, were of seemingly just old white men. And I was sad to see that because there wasn't maybe a Tyrone up there or a Chu or and so when you talk about finding those mentors and understanding that of the 5 mentors that I have, there's only one old white man. The others I'm learning extraordinary things from because they're from India or because they're from Pakistan or because they're from South Africa. And I just wondered, in your research, was that a conversation piece? Why did you choose that name as opposed to another one? And I sort of asked the question to just encourage those conversations to happen as we move forward. Why not another name type thing?
Yeah, so specifically in my research, that was not addressed, but I'll share with you a research that did happen within another program. There's a program at this institution, it's the Latina STEM Fellowship, and they did a pre and post test on these Latina girls that came into this program. So the pre-test was they asked these young ladies to look at different pictures that were in front of the table and say, which one of these represents a scientist to you? And they all were going with the white man, the Asian man, right? That's what they identified with. 2 weeks later, after this STEM fellowship where they were exposed to Latinas, professionals, blah, 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 what have you, at the end, they asked them again, who do you identify as scientists? And they were identifying Hispanic women. So, but in my research, I didn't address, well, why did you do that? But again, and so it just goes back to exposure. Once they've been exposed to something, it changes the narrative within 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, so it can happen pretty quickly.
Hi, I have a question about, well, see if you thought about this. What do we do to celebrate and to sell the college experience to people who seemingly this college experience won't do anything for me? When you are attending college and you see that there's not many here, you see that it takes a long time to see the benefit of your wage getting any higher, because now college is so expensive, I have to pay this. Truthfully, we're addressing it other issues by offering college for free, but when you are still trying to navigate that, I'm a first year generation. I always thought college was supposed to be what I was supposed to do because all of my community was African American. All of my teachers were African American. They went to school somewhere. So I always had a host of community telling me your next step, in middle school, where are you going to college? That was always the answer. Many of my fellow people went off to HBCU so they could feel more comfortable when they were at college. And when I went off to school, I would sit in the room being on the, dean's list, being the only person of color in the room, not really feel like I never had the imposter syndrome, but I was always thinking, why aren't other people here? Why don't we, now that I work with adults trying to get them back into the game, it's hard to sell the benefits clip. It's hard to tell them that eventually you will see an increase in your wage. You will see an improvement of your life. So did you ever give a thought about how do you sell this to students?
I think part of that, it needs to be internal. I think it needs to be internal. They need to want it. I think if you force it on students, maybe your children, right? Not all of them want to come to school. I think if you force it on them, I think there's not gonna be a good outcome. But I think, how do you sell it to them? I think you just provide examples. To me, like when I attended that conference and I saw so many Hispanic faces that were CEOs and lawyers and doctors, I'm like, wow, this can't happen. And how did they get here? Oh, because they have degrees? So to me, it's just being in that environment and being aware, and I think exposure, that would be the way that I would sell it.
So a follow-up would be our community college probably are, as some of us are really doing this, making those partnerships with those high schools before they even get to make those decisions about where they're going for college and showing them that this can be you too. And I was just wondering if that was part of your experience as well, like feeling like you had to be so now I see it was an internal connection. So I encourage us, I think we're preaching to the choir here, but we are all there making those internal connections. But I'm glad, thank you for your research, because it does shed light on some things that I
Yeah,
don't
yeah, I
know.
think it's, so, you know, going back to, that reminds me of another story that a student shared with me about exposure and about being in groups. He shared that, he was on a select soccer league, right? And he said that some of the reasons why he felt that he didn't have the cultural capital to succeed in college when he first got here was just that his parents didn't possess that capital or the understanding of school. He said even though he was on a select soccer league with these other, what he called white students, right? He said the white soccer moms were over here talking about, oh, you know, little Bobby was, you know, he's doing this summer program and he's gonna get scholarships to do this and that. He's like, but my mom is over here with the Latino moms and they're talking about chisme, novelas, and, you know. So it's like, yeah, they were kind of at the table, but they just weren't having those conversations. So when it came time to, you know, that exposure, we just found out that little Bobby over here, he was going to summer camps and getting this exposure of what it is. You know, my son goes to STEM engineering camps at Texas A&M. When I was young, you know, during the summer, I was either working with my dad or I was watching TV. You know, so it's that exposure. Well, what are you doing during your off time? You know.
Yes, on this one. By the way, I really appreciate your research. My concern in terms of, I guess, with the audience, we talk about first time in college, and we have such a large percentage of students who are attending part-time. How can we reach out to them to benefit from the message that we're trying to reach to the first time in college, but yet those that are just scratching out a living? So again, I guess that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, so I think that's a bigger conversation, right? So how do we get to those part-time commuter students? I mean, I was a commuter student when I was at TCU, but again, it's a bigger conversation because even students that, you know, so why, you gotta ask, why are they going part-time, right? Well, they're going part-time because they can't afford school and they gotta work, right? That's number one answer. Secondary answer might be that they have a family they gotta take care of, blah, blah, blah. But I think number one answer would be that they have to work. But then they take out financial aid. So they really do have the money to just be a college student, but they just don't understand that. You know, so they get their financial aid package, but then they also still work and they're trying to, you know, and it's this, again, it's going back to the cultural capital piece of sometimes they don't understand that, you know, like my one student said, I got so much free time because I only go to class, you know, 2 hours a week. And so it's this understanding that, no, you're supposed to be in the, you know, studying outside of the class. So what I do with students is I kind of make out, you know, get an hourly timesheet, and I say, okay, this is when you're going to class. Now put in 2 hours of when you're going to study for this class. Put in 2 hours of when you're going to study for that class. And that's your schedule. Okay, now when are you going to work, or can you work? You know, so I think it's a bigger conversation of why are they part-time?
Going a little bit back to the parents. So I'm the first generation. I'm a first generation student. And the same thing happened to me. Same thing has happened to you about going to Austin and having to go to TCU. So I had to decide between going to a private university, full ride in Dallas, or coming to TCC that was in Arlington, right? So family, of course, they said, Carla, you're going to Arlington. So, hey, I love that TCC was great. It was awesome. But just of how family is keeping you here, right? Family kept me here. So now what I do is I go back to high schools and I talk to parents, trying to educate the parents. At TCC, we have, Southeast, we have a program called AS. It's a mentoring program for Latinas. And we're having a night for parents. Same thing, we're trying to reach the parents. But something that I have find is that I talk to them, I try to explain everything that we as their kids are going through, and they're great. They're like, oh yeah, we didn't know that, or like, yeah, we're gonna support our kids, or we're gonna do this. And then I talked to the kids and they said, or the students, and they said, nothing has changed. So how do we reach the parents? How do we talk to the parents so they have this breakthrough of like, hey, students need to do this?
Yeah, so it all goes back to, I think it was in the, I don't know if it was validating experiences or one of those last two themes that I put up there, but it's intentional programming, right?
Right.
Be intentional with what you're doing. So with, I mentioned earlier the Latino STEM Fellowship that's at this campus. We pulled the parents into this and had a breakout session for them. And it was, we titled the session, this is for young ladies, right? So we pulled the parents in and said, what to expect when you're expecting your daughter to go to college. And then we had this conversation with the parents, right? And so some of the questions we asked the parents were, have you had that conversation with your kids about who's gonna pay for school? You know, because you ask some students, you know, who's paying for school? And they'll say, oh, my parents are. And then you ask the parents, they're like, no, we're not paying for it. So like so that's the other thing. When I graduated high school in 1998, you know, I thought, for some reason, I don't know where this came from, but I thought there was this big chunk of money waiting for me in the savings account. Like, hey, I got my college fund waiting for me. I didn't have anything. I don't even think my parents had a bank account. You know, so again, but we never had this conversation. So it's being intentional with your programming and, you know, that way you can educate the parents. I would say just be intentional.
It continues.
Hi. I have two children who are kind of on the spectrum. And we never pigeonholed them or stereotyped them growing up. We didn't put them into special programs. We just made accommodations and fought battles for them all the way through school. As we got them into UNT, what we found, however, though, that there was a big disconnect between what we had been told at orientation, that there would be perhaps accommodations and there would be other things, and what we experienced on a daily level communicating with faculty and staff. There were a lot of people who hid behind FERPA and refused to even acknowledge our presence until we had all of our paperwork set up and we had a pathway officially for them. And it was very, very frustrating because there wasn't even so much as the ability to answer questions. So I guess my question is how does your research point to ways to really educate a better method for including family, including parents throughout the process?
Yeah, so I think with the including parents, I think it's really educating them because we can talk to parents and educate them on the process without getting into the specifics of we're going to send you their report cards, right? So that's kind of the way I see getting parents involved. I mean, universities have parent weekends where parents come. I mean, my parents didn't go to parent weekend, but you know, how do we get those parents there? So I think when we're doing the intentionality of getting the parents involved, it's just educating them on that process and starting early, like before they come to the university. Now I hope nobody is passing out misinformation like it seems like you have received, but just educating the parents on that side of what the student is going to experience as a college student and how you can support them. I think sometimes parents also, first generation students, because the parents don't understand the environment, they just feel that, well, I can't support them and I can't really talk to them, and so I'm not going to engage with them in conversations. So it's, you know, educating the parents, no, just because you don't have experience doesn't mean that you can't support them and engage with them. This is how you can do it. These are the types of questions that you should be asking them. So I think that's what I would go with.
Hello. It seems like you'll have to conduct a next study to address that parenting component. You see that coming? It is very interesting. I'm from the Caribbean, and we are very close, tight-knit family-wise. And one of the concerns when I started doing pre-college advising, the college advisors, even the pre-college advisors, will tell students, this is not about your family or what your parents want. It's about you. And to me, I was like, well, they can't tell the students that. Because the family is part of this whole process. Find a way to bring in the family as well. And especially like, you know, Hispanic students, where family is valued and regardless of what age you are, you listen to your parents, you do what they say, right? Well, again, so that caused conflict for the Hispanic students in my group. In some cases, they just didn't go to college because it was a big conflict for them. So what I think colleges have to find a way to pull in the family, and we've been talking about this, and this FERPA thing again, some people take it very rigid. You call and you ask a question, and before this, if you have a conversation, even a general question, they would just stop the parents right there. We can't talk to you. Well, can I ask a general question? And by asking a general question, I could get some answers to what I really want to know. And, but one of the things is that we have to start early to get the parents and the students familiar with the campus. And I'm going to give you a very practical example. Tomorrow, I'm very excited. We're launching a robotic program at Weatherford College through the Tanasa Trio program. And who are the target group? Middle school students. Early. Catch them early. Get them excited about college early. And they're coming to the campus so they can walk the campus, they can talk to college professors, and what? The parents are coming too. And the group of target, they're low-income first-generation college students. When the parents come, I invite them, come eat breakfast with us. Come talk with us. This is my cell phone. You can call me or text me anytime. And by walking the campus, they can visit the other department, not just to learn about what programs the college offers, but also firsthand walk through the halls and feel not so intimidated. And see that the people on the campus are actually people too, put it this way. You have to start early to, I know like UNT, my daughter just started at UNT and had a really great parent orientation. But we need to find ways to bring parents and students on campus and have family events. Weatherford College just celebrated its 150th anniversary, and there were a lot of events and activities where people from the community, anyone, were invited to those events. When we have theaters and shows, everyone is invited, it's free. I know money is a problem, everything you do, you have to have money. But we have to find ways to make it feel like my study I conducted was sort of similar to yours. Low-income first-generation college students navigating the pathway to college. But I focused on the actual steps they have to complete to get into college. The application, completing FAFSA, the TSI, that was my focus. But yeah, we overall have to start using the FAFSA to stop parents from coming close to us. But so yeah, I encourage you to take it the next step further to focus on getting parents involved.
Yeah, I think communication with parents is important, and with family as well. So one of the things that came up with code switching, right? So code switching is just changing your communication style to adapt to your environment, right? That's basically what code switching is. And so what came out as well in the study was that students would code switch, obviously when they came here because, I got to put on this, what it is to be a student while I'm here. But then when they went back to their communities, they had to take that hat off and say, okay, now I'm back in this community. And they get called out by their community whenever they failed to code switch back. Some students would say that, and again, I think this is just because of their communities just didn't know. They're like, oh, well, you think you're better than us now because you're in college, right? Oh, well, you speak like that now. The big one is, oh, you sound white, right? That's the big one that students get, students of color, is that when you're speaking a certain way, like, oh, well, you think you're better than us now. And I think, opening up those lines of communication and bringing the parents in, bringing family in, I think this is just all of, I guess, either being naive or being, just not knowing the process. Students also shared that they felt pressure from their parents that, why aren't you coming home, to eat? Why aren't you coming and spending a lot of time with the family? And they just don't understand that, I have to study. I have things that, I have other commitments at the school. And the parents made them feel guilty. So again, it's not having this communication with their parents makes them feel guilty of being a college student. So yeah, I think it's important.
That kind of leads into my question, because I think all these parent programs are great, but they're going to take a long time to show a result. So how do we equip a student to teach their parents about their life? Because I had a student last summer, she's a year from graduation, but the last day of class, she's like, I'm not coming back in August. I can't. My dad lost his job and they're expecting me to pay rent. I grew up in a family where I was never asked to contribute to the bills. And so we had a long talk about, hey, there are other ways where you can stay in school and pay rent. But parents don't understand that. We need money, we need groceries, we need this. Your school's in the problem. So how do we equip our students until we get these parents coming to these programs and getting them involved? Because 18-year-old me would not have looked my father in the eye and said, I'm not doing that. That was a non-starter. So how do we equip students to look their parents in the eye and say, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do this?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the intentional programming, and I agree with that. One of my recommendations that I didn't put up there was to talk to our students about having these conversations with their parents. Yes, now the students are in college, but that doesn't mean they still can't have that conversation with their parents about what it is to be a college student. Now, the intentionality of what would those questions be? I mean, that's another discussion that other practitioners might be able to address. But I do think that it is important that, you know, because yeah, we can't reach all the parents and say, well, the parents didn't come, so we didn't have a session. No, what other avenues can we approach? And again, one of my recommendations was to tell the students, you know what, well, maybe what your assignment is to go and, you know, because you maybe not dictate to say this is what you're going to do, but if you made it an assignment to go and at least start those conversations and maybe not start with that conversation of I'm not going to leave school to help out the house, but maybe start early, you know, easier with like just talk to your parents about what your degree choice is, why you chose your degree, why you think college is important, so that, you know, gradually you're peeling back, you know, those conversations, and then later it can develop into that deeper, hard conversation.
Okay, we have room for this one last question. We come full circle back to our engineering faculty member.
I have students who obviously need financial aid, but consider it a handout or welfare or something as a matter of pride that they are not going to do. I'm also involved in scholarship programs where we raise money for students, and I try to tell them that there are people who want them to have the money. How do you approach students who need financial aid and feel too proud to ask for it?
Yeah, so one thing I would say is bring in somebody either from financial aid to give a discussion in your classroom. I think it all comes down to financial literacy, right? Explaining to students what exactly the financial aid process is and how to be responsible with it. So part of the reason why students don't want to take financial aid, especially minority students, is like, I don't want to take out loans. You know, there's just this fear of, I don't want to take out loans, and then they hear on the news that these students are going bankrupt because they owe $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 in student debt. And it's like, well, yeah, that's because they were irresponsible with it. So the conversations that I have with students is, you know, because I took out loans, and I tell them that, you know, when I was a student, I didn't have the money to go to school. Don't let money be the reason that you're not going to school, because there is aid out there. But I was responsible with it. When I graduated all my degrees, I think my debt was about $7,000. Now I have a colleague of mine that I know, she's not in here, so I'm okay to share. I think her debt was like $90,000, you know, and it's like, okay, well, you just got to be responsible with it. So I think it's educating them on the financial literacy, and if you don't feel comfortable with it, so again, maybe bring in somebody from the financial aid office that can help explain that to them. I think it's just knowing the process and giving examples of maybe sharing with them yourself that, hey, I took out financial aid. I don't know if you did or not, but if you did, you know, because then when you can share a story that's relatable, I think that goes a long way as well.
All right, please join me in thanking our